This morning on Inside Kansas Politics, Kansas lawmakers are back at the Kansas State House. We're breaking down some of the key takeaways from this week, including taxes. Plus,
I'm a Republican and I'm conservative, but it doesn't mean I'm always right.
Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab is throwing his name in the hat for governor. Political candidates already coming out for 2026. His message to voters still ahead.
And after a heated election, we're spotlighting the path to voting. For women, it was a long road. This morning, a look back at the history of the 19th Amendment. You're taking a look inside Kansas politics. Welcome in. I'm Rebecca Chung, and I'm here with a new face this morning, Brian Calfano.
Thanks for having me, and I'm glad to be here.
Brian, it's great to have you here. Brian's going to be co-hosting Inside Kansas Politics. And Brian, again, great to have you on board. Now let's get into our first topic this morning. It's the 19th Amendment.
We have a lot to get into on this amendment, as it has a rich history.
The 19th Amendment is marked by decades of activism and protest.
It took more than 40 years just to debate the issue in Congress.
From 1878 to 1919, women did not let up on making sure their voices were heard.
Finally, in 1919, Congress passed the amendment with a two-thirds majority vote, and Kansas was one of the first states to ratify the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote in national elections.
And to talk more about this, we have Sarah Bell, who is the director of the Kansas Museum of History. Sarah, it's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Sarah, we want to first have you talk us through some of the historical visuals about women's suffrage in Kansas around the nation. So let's start with the cover photo to a recent exhibition at the Kansas Historical Society. Why is this important to focus on women's suffrage and Kansas's role in it?
So this is one of my favorite topics to talk about within the history of Kansas. And it is because women played such a significant role within really pushing for and championing the right to vote. And for Kansas, it has a really significant role within the larger national story of women's suffrage. For a time in the late 19th century, Kansas was really a leader when it came to women's suffrage. A lot of firsts happened in Kansas. And so it's something that I really like sharing with Kansans to show that Kansas has this rich history of progressive women pushing for this equality. But it was a hard, long-fought fight in order to get that right to vote. In fact, it took more than 50 years from the first campaign to get full voting rights for women to when Kansas was actually successful in 1912.
Now, we have a graphic coming up with Susan B. Anthony and a quote that she made about folks who were not supporting female suffrage. It's a blunt quote, and it's somewhat humorous when you think about it, but it's reflective of something. Well, what were the social concerns about women's suffrage in Anthony's era?
Sure. So I would say Susan B. Anthony, first of all, was a pretty blunt lady, and I think you had to be, because imagine essentially what women were asking for is that they had to convince men, who were the voting bloc at that time, to share their power with women and to give women that right to vote. And so during this time period, really from the 1860s until 1920 with the 19th Amendment, suffragists used a lot of different tactics in order to convince those voters that this was an essential thing that they should support. And so you can see some of that rhetoric over the years and how it kind of changed. But really what they were pushing for and why this was such a radical concept is because at the time, this was pushing against this idea that women's place was really in the home, this ideology of separate spheres, that men, their place was more in politics and the public, but women were more in the home. And so it was this really radical concept to say that women should actually have equality within this public sphere element of politics. But even further than that, what suffragists encompass is that they themselves were going out in public championing this. They were doing speeches and campaigning. And so this was seen as, by some, not just men, by plenty of women as well, as stepping outside of these boundaries.
Okay, let's also talk about getting the message out through speeches and publications like The Revolution. And also, I think this is really fascinating, but weren't women able to serve in office before they were even allowed to vote?
So Kansas has a great story when it comes to an elected official. And this is also a way to really spotlight one of the first for Kansas within the story of women's suffrage. So in 1887, Kansas women acquire the right to vote in municipal suffrage elections, city elections. Now, this was really significant. May not sound that significant to us today, but at that time, Kansas had given women the most voting rights of any state in the nation. Some viewers may be familiar that Wyoming Territory had given women full voting rights, but Kansas was the state that had the furthest at that point. So for this recognition, the color yellow had been selected by the National Association to recognize the Kansas sunflower as for this big achievement within the women's suffrage story. Now, one of the reasons that women were able to achieve this in 1887 is that they said they would help elect the right men into office in order to keep enforcement of the Prohibition Amendment that had passed several years before. But sometimes the right men aren't always men, and what we have in 1887 is the election of the first woman mayor anywhere in the country, here in Kansas, with Susanna Salter. And that happened in Argonia, Kansas. She was elected as a joke. Her name was put up. She did not run for office, but she accepted the nomination and she won with 2/3 of the vote. So even though women in Kansas did not have full voting rights, they were eligible to have these elected city positions. And Susanna Salter was the first, but not the last. And there was a flurry of these women mayors and city council women over the next several years because of this.
Wow, incredible.
Now, the next visual we've got is going to be one that shows the mass meeting advertisement.
Mm-hmm.
What were these meetings like?
So partly what I had studied when I was doing my dissertation research several years ago was an organization called the Chautauqua, and it had these assemblies and these gatherings over the summer, and they were very similar to these mass meeting advertising and campaigns for getting folks together to talk about pushing for and advocating the right to vote. And one of the things that I found out from the Chautauqua is that sometimes you couldn't be very blatant that you were advertising and talking about suffrage, that not everyone wanted to come to hear a suffrage talk, so you had to kind of hide it within some other topics. So that happened in a couple occasions with the Chautauqua. But in other cases, like with this advertisement, it was very clear what this was for, and that they are calling for and getting all these supporters to come together and to show that they are in support of this really, again, radical issue that for pushing for women's equality. And so you would have women like Anna Howard Shaw, Carrie Chapman Catt in this case, in Waukene, Kansas. These are national leaders and these are well-known individuals coming to a small town in Kansas. This was a big deal. And so even if you weren't necessarily a suffrage supporter, you may have gone just to see these famous women coming to talk about a subject that certainly could be divisive at this time.
Okay, and finally, a victory for Kansas suffrage. Let's pull up that image real quick. Let's talk a little bit about this. What is this? It's a telegram.
So it is a telegram that needs some explanation because what happened was that November 5th, 1912, Kansans go to the polls, and the next morning suffragists wake up to the good news. Kansas women got the right to vote. So Anna Howard Shaw, this says in this telegram that welcoming Kansas as the 7th star. So what this is indicative of is that Kansas was supposed to be the 7th state to have gotten this, given this right to vote to women. But there were actually 2 other states that on the same day had also granted women the right to vote, Arizona and Oregon. So Kansas is actually credited as the 8th state, even though the telegram says 7th, that we were we have that title of the 8th state, but that there, up to that point in 1912, that there were 9 states that had granted women the right to vote at that point, and Kansas was one of them.
Sarah Bell from the Kansas Historical Society, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And after the break, we sit down with Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab, the state's top election official, now setting his sights on the governor's seat.
What he says his top priorities are coming up. We'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
Need your fireplace inspected? Make sure you and your family are safe this winter and avoid being a statistic. Certified Fireplace and Chimney now has openings as soon as this week. No need to wait months to be seen. Call or text us today to schedule your appointment.
The people that I represent have had serious injuries or deaths in the family.
Being able to be there for someone and have that feeling of providing for them.
Being able to help them through that process and relieve some of the stress that comes from that kind of uncertainty.
Finding the truth for my clients and solving their problems.
I became a lawyer to make a difference in people's lives and getting my clients there and getting them compensation and letting them know that there's somebody there fighting for them. It's really rewarding.
Hi, I'm Bob Euchre. I was 5 years old when Lou Gehrig retired from baseball because of ALS. It's been 8 decades since Lou's speech, and we still don't have a cure for this devastating disease that affects thousands of Americans every year, including my daughter Leanne. But we are making progress, and we need your help to finally strike out ALS. Please join us by visiting als.org. Thank you.
I'm here with K to the C.
Every weekday.
Like, not everyone's Kelly Clarkson.
I just love you.
Everyone comes out to play.
That is really good. We've got this. We've got this. 1, 2. Make every day?
I was so weird.
I'm weird too, though, so maybe that's why I think you're cool. A Kelly day. We're having a good time.
Weekdays at 3 on 27 KSNT.
Our new fireplace and room design showcase is now open. Come experience our exclusive designs, demonstrations, and have our team render your perfect focal point. Certified Fireplace and Chimney, transforming your visions into reality.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I know we just got out of a big election year, but there's another race already in the spotlight. It's the race for governor in 2026.
And one of the candidates is Scott Schwab, the state's top election official. I got a chance to sit down with the Secretary of State to talk about everything from his top priorities to the messages he's sending to voters.
Well, the runway doesn't get shorter. Every day you're not out there working and making your case and trying to raise money, because campaigns cost money, is every day you lost. And I've decided ever since I got reelected, even the first one elected, I'd only serve 2 terms as Secretary of State. We focused hard on correcting problems, that some of which have been ignored for years in this agency. And while focusing on those, it's time for somebody else to come in. But we've solved problems here. I've spent over 25 years serving state government. I don't think Kansans want a mediocre or a middle Kansas. They want an extraordinary state. And we have one, and we have a great opportunity before us to do that. And I want to be that person to help lead us there, not because I want the title, it's because I want to do the things. We get tied up in things that I don't understand why we get tied up in. Whether and it goes back to like having China own property around military bases. That should not be controversial. We don't want someone who we could potentially be going to war with over the next 10 years buying property around the National Biodefense Facility. You know, that can affect our food chain. And so those are some values. Sometimes I think we sometimes get from the parties, and I'll say both parties, fight for the sake of fighting. And it used to be, I came through the legislature of, there's going to be a fight. But at the end of the day, we have to govern, because that's what people expect out of their leaders. I found out in this role as an administrator, I've been in the legislature for years, then coming over here, I'm in another branch of government. Oftentimes, people forget that there's separation of powers, and to respect that legislative process, even though it's messy and it's not always pretty. But if you can build those relationships and respect their constitutional authority, then they'll respect yours and not try to stifle you. And then you're rowing together to make Kansas a better place. So I do believe in a 2-party system. I'm a Republican and I'm conservative, but it doesn't mean I'm always right. There were times, like on voter ID, that we had the numbers, so we were forging ahead. And if it wasn't for some of the Democrat colleagues I got along with, I wouldn't have realized some of the first drafts were kind of unconstitutional, and they were wrong. And so they weren't going to vote for it, although it was a bipartisan bill in the end. Even Laura Kelly voted for that bill. And it was because I listened to their concerns. And it's important to have administration that's willing to listen to the other side, because at the end of the day, you need them. You may not always agree with them, but you need them. There needs to always be a representative of the minority thought.
All right, it looks like Schwab is talking a lot about bipartisanship when it comes to, going into this governor's race. But what is it that you were able to find out, Brian?
Well, what's fascinating is you have these political interest groups, Rebecca, that will issue scores, and they'll say, okay, well, if you're a conservative group, we want to see how conservative a legislator is with the person's voting. So you've got something like Kansans for Life, pro-life group, giving Schwab, over the course of his legislative career, a 100% rating, meaning that Schwab is as pro-life as they come. But what's fascinating is if you look at some of the other issue-oriented groups and what they're saying about his conservatism, the American Conservative Union, looking at the overall conservative rate or view for Schwab, they give him a 79% out of 100. And in terms of fiscal conservatism, the Kansas Policy Institute gives Schwab 64%. Meanwhile, the NRA, which is looking at gun rights and gun issues more generally, gives Schwab 75%. Now, those are all conservative scores, but they're not 100% across the board. And so what this does is it suggests that at times Schwab has made that walk across the aisle, that proverbial walk, to say, I'm going to make common cause with some of the other folks in this chamber who may not be voting my way all the time, but we need to work together for the betterment of Kansas and all the sorts of things that he was saying.
All right, Brian, thank you so much. And we also have some other candidates that could be coming out on the Republican side. That's Senate President Ty Masterson looking like a widely expected candidate to run. But we talked with him about that, and right now it's unlikely that he'd be making an announcement before session wraps up. Take a listen.
I hope you can understand it. In this bill, if I were to do something like that or say I'm doing anything like that, that's what everybody would color every decision you made in that vein, right? And so I really don't even want to think about it till after session. And then we'll see. Months in politics can be a long time, right? I mean, political landscapes can change in months, and I don't know what it's going to look like, in March, or let alone, May or June.
All right, well, it seems like he may be holding off if he decides to run at all. We'll have to see who else announces their run this year. Coming up, we're talking about taxes. It's one of the hot topics for Kansas lawmakers this year.
But is another tax cut worth the cost? We're talking with an expert to break down the numbers. We'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
Welcome to the Washburn family. We are so excited you are here. You will make relationships in the next 4 years that will last a lifetime. You will connect with other students, faculty and staff, your advisor, and your coach. That's how we thrive, that's how you thrive, and that's what we mean when we say, go Bods!
Our local businesses are filled with hardworking, dedicated entrepreneurs who are Kansas proud. Consider shopping these Kansas proud businesses. Businesses like Ladyfingers Automotive and Certified Fireplace and Chimney.
What's the plan, Callahan? We're going to steal the sheriff's mattress. Or shouldn't we be stealing gold instead? You can't sleep on gold, can you? We could also buy a mattress with the gold, no? You have to ask yourself something. Oh, what's that? You feeling lucky, Pug?
Shop the New Year's half-price sale going on now at Lebeda. Hybrid mattresses.
Half price.
Two-sided mattresses.
Half price.
Adjustables.
Half price.
Cooling gel.
Half price.
Sale ends Monday at Lebeda.
Anyone can choose to make a difference. You can help people succeed, rebuild after disasters, protect the environment, or feed the hungry. Not only will you make a difference for others, but for yourself. You can earn money for college, learn career skills, and make friendships that last a lifetime. Make a difference. Choose your future. Choose AmeriCorps.
From his movie A Real Pain, Jesse Eisenberg. Plus Melissa Gilbert. So you enjoy quilting, right? I'm a quilter. I'm not great at it. I am not great at it either. What do you do to check out?
I lie under a quilt and take a nice nap.
Monday at 3 on 27 KSNT.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. Tax relief is going to be a big focus for Kansas lawmakers this year, with property taxes at the forefront of that debate.
Yeah, we have the governor asking lawmakers to hold off on a tax cut this year, unless there's a plan that could pay for itself. We'll have to see if that happens. Then Republicans are hoping to pass a constitutional amendment to let voters decide on a property value cap.
It's going to be another heated battle over what actually gets through, and I spoke with an economist to get his take.
They have to take it out of somewhere. So if right now, if they're running a bit of a surplus, maybe as long as the income tax revenue stays stable for the next couple of years, maybe they don't have to have any particular cuts anywhere to make up for that. But in the long run, one of the benefits of the property tax is that property tax is the most stable of the taxes, right? So the underlying base that you're taxing stays pretty stable. Income tax is a lot more volatile. Corporate income tax is very volatile. Sales tax is not as stable as the property tax. Kind of the potential problem is that the income, as more reliant you are on the income tax, that's something that if a recession hits, that's more likely to have a big drop for a year or two as we go through that recession. all tax cuts in the long run have to be funded by spending cuts. All spending increases have to be funded by tax increases. So it's really a balance of what are the residents getting, or is what they're getting in terms of more money in their pockets worth more to them than the reduction in state services, or vice versa if the government expands some type of services, are those services that you're getting from the extra spending worth the extra taxes that you inevitably have to pay?
Now, what's really interesting about that interview is he lays out why we have property taxes in the first place, because they're the most stable. You can have the various income taxes, the sales tax, but when you have economic downturns, those tax forms are going to end up having the biggest hit potentially during a recession. So having the property tax set up provides some kind of expectation among members of government that when they do the budget, they're going to have X number of dollars coming in. Of course, as the state officials have been telling us all week, Rebecca, it's really not much at the state level. These are county and municipal taxes and school taxes that are coming out from the property tax instrument, if you will.
Okay. So when it comes to something like this, developing a sustainable plan, is that really that big of a concern when it comes to the state budget and things like that?
Well, not in terms of the overall numbers. If you're looking at the 60 or 70 million, let's say that the state goes ahead and does the complete cut, does away with the property tax at the state level entirely, you end up with a $60–70 million hole. What's going to be interesting there is to see if Governor Kelly then turns around and says, okay, well, that money is what I was going to suggest we use for K-12. Or for Medicaid expansion, right? Or for whatever her policy might be that she's wanting to push at that particular time. And it gives her a chance to say, wait a minute, this is not fiscally responsible, at least in my estimation as the governor. Therefore, we can't afford this tax cut. Therefore, I'm going to veto.
And I know some people are concerned how much of this is really more of a political game heading into an election year next year, perhaps trying to not deliver a win for Republicans on that end.
Right, and of course she has to worry about the supermajority and the veto override, but I think she does want to try to make some political hay for her benefit to say, look, I'm trying to be the fiscally responsible one. And you heard that in the State of the State address this week where she said we've already had $2 billion or so worth of tax cuts. Another 60–70 million more. This is something that Ty Masterson would say, well, it's the principle of it. We shouldn't be assessing property taxes at the state level. So where this all goes with the negotiations over the next few weeks is what we're going to be tracking, because it's quite interesting. We have a lot more to come when we get back.
More key takeaways from the first week of session. We'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
What does it mean when we say Devon James wins?
It means standing up for people in our community when they can't stand up for themselves.
It means starting early and staying late until a wrong has been made right.
It means fighting injustice every day.
And it means giving back to the community that's given us so much. When you need lawyers who care about Kansas, Devon James wins. Call or text 888-8888.
Taking care of my mother is a 24-hour-a-day job. I need a break sometimes. Let Home Instead help you take a well-deserved break. Trusted relief when you need it.
Hello, Kansas. David Ellis with Ellis Boys in Holden. And we'd like for you to come out and check out our spectacular deals on the new models.
The Wrap Up the Year sales event is going on now. Say goodbye to your old vehicle and hello to your new 2025 Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, or Ram today and save thousands. Start the new year off right. Let us help you find a new vehicle during the Wrap Up the Year sales event.
That's at Ellis Boys, just a short 20-minute drive north of Topeka on Highway 75 or at ellisboys.com.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
The NASCAR Xfinity Series. Whoa! The pressure is ramped up.
This is how we do it in Xfinity, boys!
This is my time!
New season begins February 15th from Daytona on the CW.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. We're back with more takeaways from the first week of the Kansas legislative session.
It's early on, but we're already hearing about some big issues that could come up this year. For Democrats, that's Medicaid expansion. The governor has seen her 7th bill teed up this year, but she's making another big push to get it through in her State of the State address.
And if we don't expand Medicaid this year, 2025, it will cost Kansas taxpayers another $78.3 million. In total, we've wasted over $280 million Kansas taxpayer dollars holding on to an ideological falsehood. Imagine the property tax relief we could have given to Kansans.
All right, and she tries to tie it into that bigger issue of property tax relief, Brian, which is, I guess she's really trying to push for it this year and see if, maybe there can be something done. But we will reference what happened last session where it did get a hearing for the first time in years, and Republican lawmakers on the committee tabled the issue. So the likelihood of this coming up, and we're already hearing from Republican leaders on both sides, it's not something that there's much favor for, right? The likelihood of this Medicaid expansion getting through this year is really, it's just not there. It doesn't seem like it.
And it seems like it's also a national issue,
right,
more than it is a state issue. And for obvious reasons, it's a national issue. Republicans have been trying to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act for over 10 years. And I think now, with incoming President-elect Trump and Republicans controlling Congress, there might be some anticipation in Topeka to suggest, well, look, we're maybe not going to have that backstop. Maybe at some point the federal government isn't going to continue to fund an expansion if we put one through, and then we as the state government are going to be on the hook. Now that might be their argument. The governor's argument, though, is one of fiscal responsibility as well. If you think about it, it's costing Kansans X hundreds of millions of dollars over a certain number of years to pay for something that you've got all these other states that are taking advantage of the federal government's largesse.
Right. And then Republicans, they always mention in that same debate, how much would we owe on the back end if, something were to fall through? How much would we be on the hook for?
Exactly.
Essentially. So, it's going to be another issue that I think the governor pushes for, may not really go through this year.
We'll see how bipartisan this
bipartisan.
session ends up being. Now let's talk about K through 12 funding. This is probably an issue that will also tie into the tax fight this year.
Yeah, definitely. We're talking about school funding, which has always been a big issue every session, and the governor always pushes to fully fund public schools. But the aspect of this property tax relief bill, where will that money come from to make up for it is the question.
And that's what I'm predicting is going to happen. She's going to use any attempt to have that property tax cut go through to say those millions of dollars, that was what we were going to use for K-12. And I don't know that Republicans are going to want to sit there and be the party that said, we're not going to fully fund the formula. That's something that's politically difficult for many Republicans. Even though you've got those super majorities, the one thing people don't always realize is the bigger the majority, the more you've got fractures within that group. It doesn't mean that all 88 in the House, for example, are in lockstep on all of these issues. So that's going to be something to really watch if she tries to carve off 10 or 12 moderate Republicans on an issue like that, and she can put through some kind of veto over any kind of property tax relief because she's going to try to make this rhetorically, at least, about fully funding the K-12 formula.
Right, and she said in her State of the State address, I will not support a plan that takes money away from public schools. So we'll have to see how this plays out. Now, we know some issues are making a comeback this year that includes gender-affirming care for minors, and Republicans making another push to ban it. Here's what Senate President Ty Masterson had to say about the issue.
Finally, we will not allow the extreme trans agenda to impact our kids. We successfully ensured that women's sports in Kansas are reserved exclusively for women, and we will again pass the Help Not Harm Act, which prohibits the permanent mutilation of minors. Unfortunately, the governor sided with the radical left on this topic and vetoed the bill, which we were not able to override by just 2 votes. You fixed that problem in this last election.
Now, maybe they did fix it, according to Masterson's words, in the last election.
Yeah.
But an issue like this, I think, has personal dynamics that cut across party lines, and it's not really clear that you're just going to have the entire Republican caucus voting to override any kind of veto in this case. Those kinds of cultural issues get very personal.
They do.
And they can transcend party lines in ways that we may not even anticipate just talking about them now.
They could be much closer this year, though, especially because they do have numbers that are pass that 2/3 majority they would need to override the governor's veto on a vote. So with this year, they may be much closer to passing that gender-affirming care ban. That's all the time we have for now, and that was your look inside Kansas politics. If you want to keep up to date on all things Kansas politics, then follow us on social media. Follow us on X at NKS Politics and on Facebook. Just search Inside Kansas Politics.
We'll also post the full video on YouTube. Just search KSNT News and check ksnt.com/inside-kansas-politics for past episodes. And if you have a story you want Kansas legislators to hear or topics you think we ought to cover, let us know. You can email us at ikp@ksnt.com, and we'll see you right here, same place, same time. Have a good day.